Welcome. In this lecture, we are going to be dealing with the intricacies of unpossess when mixed with the view target. We're going to see how, in actual fact, they affect each other and they can change each other. So when you possess, the view target can change. And we're going to find out how to mitigate that and how to manually manage the view target. So let's dive in and give that a shot. So the last lecture showed us how to use view targets. Now I warned you that adding unpossession or using the detach destroy thing before or after this is going to cause some complications. So what I'm going to do, and you can follow me along with this just to see the effects, is what actually happens if we unpossess before we do this whole malarkey around setting the view target. In fact, let's factor that out into a function. That will make it easier. I will go and collapse to a function, and I will call that function spawn death camera. Let's do it with some spaces to keep it in line with the other functions. Okie doke. And then what we're going to do before we spawn the death camera is to depossess. So let's do that by going and finding the character. So I'll do a get character. Where is that? No, not get character, get controller. I'm losing my mind. So that get controller, we are going to unpossess that controller. And we're going to do that before we spawn the death camera. Why before, I hear you ask? Well, if we do it after, there are some caveats, and I will talk about those in a little bit. So let's save that and go ahead and hit play. And Unreal crashes, of course, as is a common sight these days. However, this time it seems to be in our code. It's saying that there's a problem on line 106 of tile CPP. Let's head on over there. 106, well, it's dereferencing spawned, which we've just created. So if spawned is in fact empty, then we've got some problems. So I'm going to do an if spawned equals null pointer. We're going to return early from this function, put our brackets on separate lines for styles, and then return from there. Then I'm going to launch Unreal again, like so, and we'll recompile, but I'll skip over that bit because you don't want to see it. So with the recompile finished, let's go ahead and hit play again, and hopefully we won't be getting that same error. Hopefully, I say. Okay, here we are. No error. Very loud sounds though. Let's bring that volume down. And we are being roasted, so let's go ahead and get ourselves massacred. And as you can see, we didn't blend out of there. Now, what is the reason for this? Why is it that when we unpossess, our blend target, our view target, doesn't work anymore? The key to understanding this is to know that actually the player controller is trying to do something clever here when you're unpossessing. It's saying that I know that generally we want the view target to be the thing that is possessed. So I'm going to manage this by default. And I'm going to say that when we depossess from something, I'm going to make sure that we set myself, the player controller, as the main thing that we want to view. And the player controller will just by default be where the pawn was last time we left it. That's why we're getting it just sitting there in this over-the-shoulder view. Okay, so that's not what we want. That's not what we want it to see at all. We want to be editing that manually. So to edit the view controller, the view target rather, manually, we need to create a derivative of our player controller. So I'm going to do that over in my behavior script. I'm going to go and add a new blueprint class, derivative of the player controller, and call it BP player, well, not all uppercase, player controller. Like so. And if we fire that up, okie doke, then have a look at the properties, you can see that we have this auto manage right near the top, second property down, auto manage active camera target. That's what we want to uncheck and make sure that it's no longer auto managing. So your challenge is to take over from this auto-managing property. Seeing as it's no longer auto-managing, you're going to have to do the grunt work yourself. So that is the challenge, to manually manage the view target. Now, there's a few things to consider. Firstly, this is basic, but you need to ensure that the BP player controller is in fact being used by setting that up in the game mode. What happens when you spawn? So that is the first thing to think. Like, who is responsible for setting up that view target when it's not auto-managed when you spawn and possess? And does it work? If you have figured out spawning and what to do there, is it working properly? And then if you unpossess after instead of before, as we're currently doing, if you unpossess after the creation of that third person character, what happens then? And no need to figure out if anything doesn't work here, no need to figure out why. I will be talking about the reason in a little bit. So pause the video and have a go. Okay, welcome back. So first things first, the player controller. Let's make sure that that one is the one in use. So I'm going to go to the Blueprints menu under my first person map, game mode. I'm going to edit the BP Infinite Terrain game mode. And in here, where we have the classes and where we currently have player controller in two places, I'm going to swap that over to BP player controller if both instances, even though we don't really have a replay spectator, might as well, for consistency, swap it over. So I'm going to go ahead and save that new game mode. And we're going to go ahead and hit play and see what goes wrong here. Okay, so what's weird about this? Well, we're right in the center of this dude. And the reason for that is because by default, the view target that we have is just the player controller. And it hasn't been set to anything else. And because it's not auto-managed, it's not going to be set to anything else. So when we possess, we are going to need to do something slightly differently. So I'm going to go over to the event graph of our BP character. And I'm going to create a new possess event. So event, if I can type event possess. And when we are possessed, that is when we're going to take that new controller. We're going to cast it to player controller, so only doing this if it's a player controller. And if it is a player controller, that is when we are going to set the view target with blend, but we're going to set the blend time to 0. We don't want any blending at this early stage. And the view target that we're going to set is in fact us. So get the reference to self, and that should do the trick. Obviously C++, that's going to be a this, and this set view target with blend, you can also just use set view target. Okay, so let's save that and go ahead and hit the play button and see whether we've got a better experience. Okay, now we're in the first person location that we wanted, and I'm going to kill myself, and oh, unfortunately that still hasn't worked. Now the reason is actually slightly subtle, and it's a little bit of a gotcha with Blueprint. So if we go into our kill character and to the spawn death camera, then what you'll see that's happening is that we're calling this get controller, but we've only just destroyed or just unpossessed the controller, which means that this controller is now null. So what we need to do is have that saved, get the old controller and have it saved when we have unpossessed, or pass in the controller from out here. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a variable on our class. I'm going to call it the old controller, like so. And that old controller I am going to set to the right type. So let's call it a controller, like so. And then let's go over to our event graph. And I want that to be correct most of the time. So let's set it in the right place, which is when we are possessed. That's when the old controller will be updated. So I'm going to set the old controller before I do anything else. Set old controller before I do any of the view target setting. And then we can use that in the cast player controller, like so. And that should mean that when we do this spawn death, we should be able to, instead of getting the controller, get the old controller. So let's do that. Let's do a old controller, get old controller, and that's very simple. Great. So now we shouldn't have the issue of having a null controller. Go ahead and hit play. Getting shot at, and let's hit the X to die, and excellent, we're zooming out. We're no longer in possession, so we can't move around. As you can see from the gun, it's also in his hand, so I'm happy with that. So that pretty much wraps it up. Now, as I alluded to at the beginning, there can sometimes be problems when you put unpossess after the spawn dead camera. That can be because unpossess sometimes is very persistent in trying to unset the view target. This isn't always the case, as I've just tried and it doesn't actually do anything in our case, but if you do find issues with that, do remember that unpossess, even when you've got the auto manage activate camera switched off, can still cause some issues. Just it's a special case, whereas possess will be fine and won't change things and will not actually do anything. Unpossess can be a little bit dodgy sometimes. Okay, so we've just set up a great transition and we've done that with depossession, still fully functioning. So pat yourselves on the back and move on.